Everybody's got their rules. Okay. Thank you for joining. Um, if you were going to join on Facebook, I think the Facebook is not working, but the YouTube is. So if you know anybody that's trying to go there, you can go to YouTube. Okay. Thank you for Good Yom Tif. Today is a very powerful day. So we're living now literally in such an amazing time. Such an amazing time. An amazing time in the sense that there is space. There is massive space right now. And it's an incredible, what we call Shas HaKosher. It's an opportune time to get a little ambitious and get a little strong. And even if we are just a minority, and perhaps a minority of a minority, but this exactly is Yud Beis Tammuz. Yud Beis Tammuz is the victory of the few over the many, the weak over the at least externally looking weak over the mighty. It's literally what you say in Hanukkah. The pure, the impure were beaten by the pure. The many, right? The few were overpowered the many, and the weak. Literally, what we say in the Alanism for Hanukkah. The Friediger Rebbe stood up against the government, which I think the Rebbe usually uses the term, a government that controlled 187 million people. And here you have a single person without even a gun, standing up against a mighty regime that killed, I think Stalin killed, like in the amounts of it's not normal, the amount of people. And yet the previous Rebbe beat him. And the previous Rebbe won. He won his fight in Russia to persevere Judaism in Russia. They could not destroy him. They had to release the Friediger Rebbe today, 95 years ago. Today was actually when he left, just a few hours ago, 95 years ago. So the Rebbe points out exactly in the Hayom Yon which moment he left. A half an hour after midday, that's when the Friediger Rebbe left his exile. So, and the rest is history, because 70 years later, Lubavitch, no one else, Lubavitch, beginning with the Friediger Rebbe and continuing with our Rebbe, toppled the Soviet Union. And it came crashing down. And there's nothing left of it, besides maybe some old KGB men playing cards in the park. There's nothing left of it, of that previous government. But Chabad, Yiddishkeit, Torah mitzvahs, yeshivas, mikvahs, schools, kosher, everything is thriving across the previous Soviet Union. So the Rebbe won. The Rebbe won because the Rebbe was fighting God's fight. And God will win because God is truth. And truth always wins over falsehood. And so that's the inspiration from Yud Beis Tammuz. If we are the soldiers of truth, if we are the communicators of truth, and if we stand for what's real, doesn't make a difference if it's just a few. The Friediger Rebbe had a handful of Hasidim. Then in Russia with him, just a handful. And yet they overpowered and they won. And it's not just a conquest of in the Soviet Union. Basically, it's a world conquest. Because once the previous Rebbe came out, and then as we mentioned earlier, he relocated to America, and from America, Chabad literally exploded across the globe. And every single day, millions of people are impacted all over, in airports, on streets, in parks, in shopping malls, in banks, wherever they are. We have no idea. I would say in the millions, because you know how many shiurim go around online from Chabad rabbis and teachers and memes and WhatsApps and inspiration and connections and people meeting and mitzvahs. It's like, and it's only growing bigger and stronger and so on. And it's paving the way to the Geula. It's paving the way to the complete redemption. So that's the inspiration we get, that when you're on the right side, don't be afraid that you're just a few. Don't be intimidated by the fact that you think that you don't have impact. Because if we're connected to the source and we allow Hashem to come through us, we will win and we will prevail. In the words of Chassidus, Didan Notzach, our side will win. Now, when it comes to the most crucial thing has to be done right now, which is not yet that popular. In a very short period of time, it will be the most popular thing in the world. There won't be anything as popular as exactly this. But right now, people, it's not popular. It's not even popular. It's not even popular amongst the Jewish people. It's not popular amongst the frum Jewish people. It's not even popular in Chabad. And it's women sitting around the table over here and in a few other places, and people that deeply care. But there's no question that this is the future. Now let me explain. Why the time right now? The Rebbe told us already the time of the Geula has arrived. We're entered into Mashiach's territory. There's no question. This year has enormous qualities. I mean, we don't have to go further than the fact that the Gemara talks about Shemitah, and the Gemara talks about Matzah Shemitah as the most opportune time for Mashiach to come. And we're now entering into the Matzah Shemitah, the end of Shemitah. As discussed in so many classes I've discussed in the past, we have already completed all the work. The Rebbe said we completed, but even from terms of numbers, we've completed all the work. It's 3,333 years since the giving of the Torah, which the number 3 is the number of Matan Torah, as explained elsewhere, how the Torah is associated with number 3. So if you talk about like the completion of things, because Torah's effect on the world comes in a way of accumulation. It accumulates, and after all of its accumulation, it burrows through or uncovers the godliness of the world and reveals it. So when you're done after 3,333 years, you're there. It's impossible not to be there. In addition to that, and particularly Malchus Beis David, which means the kingdom of Mashiach the time has arrived. Kiva Moyed. One of the things that, again, we didn't hear it from anybody, but it still makes so much sense and it's so logical, is that this is the year which is the exact. We all are familiar with the concept that the evolution of mankind is in 3 stages. It goes from Adam Harishon, who's the first attempt when God creates man. Hashem, but since it was given, all the gifts to him were given from above. It wasn't his own earned gifts. Adam Harishon failed because you have to work it out on your own. Whatever is given to you as a gift doesn't stick. So Adam Harishon, was created in enormous heights, but he didn't even go to sleep one night on that level. He fell immediately. Adam biyakar bal yolin, it says in the pasuk in Tehillim. Adam Harishon did not even have one night that he slept over, that he lodged in his glory. He fell. And then, but who was the rectification of Adam? David HaMelech. David HaMelech is the stage where Adam is supposed to establish Hashem's kingdom in this world, but he didn't, and that's why he's created on Friday. And what do we say on Friday? Hashem Malach, Hashem is king. That's man's role to facilitate God's kingship in this world. And Adam couldn't do it. So the next phase is David HaMelech. And David didn't start with David. Obviously, it's a build-up. It's a build-up of 14 generations. David is Gematria 14. From Avram Avinu until David HaMelech, there is an accumulation, a build-up of generation after generation. And then we reach the peak of establishing a holy, godly presence in this world. We reach that peak with David. So you have David HaMelech is the middle. And then finally, who's going to be the completion of it all? Who wraps it up? Who's the closer? Mashiach. And it's hinted to in the word Adam. Adam, David, Mashiach. So as discussed, this is a concept I mentioned many times, as discussed, it would only make sense to say that the amount of time you have from Adam until David is the same amount of time that you have from David to Mashiach. So if we count Adam Harishon from the day Adam Harishon was created, that's when he was at his glory, till the day that David HaMelech became king, the amount of time is 2,800 and 2,000 400, I think, and 41 years. 2441 is from Adam Arishon until David HaMelech. Now let's do. I'm sorry, I should have made this cheshbon before. I'm terrible at math, and I'm the one with always with the gematrias. But give me a second here. Give me just 1 second. 5782 divided by 2. Oh, I'm sorry. The amount of time from creation, from Adam Arishon until David HaMelech, is 2,891 years. 2891. David HaMelech became king over the Jewish people when he was 37 years old. That's when he was accepted as Melech over all of the Jewish people. And then, so it would make sense, from Adam to David is the same amount from David to Mashiach. So this year doubles that. 2891 times 2 is 5782. So if there was ever a time that V'chisei David Avdacha Mehera B'Seichatachen, that Hashem's David HaMelech's throne should be firmly established, this week's parsha, Darach Koichav Miyakov, that the star will rise forth from Yaakov, V'cham Shevet Mi Yisrael, and a ruling power will get up from Israel. So the Rambam says we're talking about, hear these words, the Rambam says we're talking about two Mashiachim, the two Mashiachs. David is the first Mashiach, and Mashiach, Tzidkenu, is the final Mashiach. Darach Koichav Mi Yaakov is David HaMelech, V'cham Shevet Mi Yisrael, and a ruling power will get up from Yidden, that's Mashiach. And now we're at exactly the junction of from Adam to David, from David to Mashiach. So we see something stunning. It doesn't make any sense otherwise to explain this. And that is that our little Medinala, who is so sophisticated and so brilliant and so smart and so innovative in every single way, has become the laughing stock of the entire world because they can't put together a ridiculous government. It's like insane. It fell 5 times. They try and it falls. They try and it falls. They try and it falls. It's like a slippery chair that no one can sit on. It's like it doesn't make any sense. Every time they kind of craft it together, it just crumbles. And like they made a final attempt, and you see that every one of these attempts is obviously a substitute for Mashiach. How do you see? Because each time they try to put it together, they try to put it together worse than it was before. This last government that they put together was the most fragile and the most incomprehensible set of government. And in terms of having so many elements that was so antithetical to Mashiach. It was so anti-religion and Judaism, and it was so anti the Jewish flavor of Eretz Yisrael, and it included the Arabs in the government, which was meant to be that there is that it's not, it goes against the character of Israel being a Jewish state. Which Mashiach is, that Eretz Yisrael is the land of the Jewish people, and from there Hashem's empire is created for the whole world. So the last attempt was the most anti can be, and when did it fall? Just 2 weeks ago. It just couldn't hold. Less than a year, it collapsed, and now they're going to elections again. We say in the Haftarah, which the blessings of the Haftarah, which we say in Shul when we read Prophet's Navi. We say these words, Al Kisoi Loy Yeshev Zar. On his throne, a foreigner will not sit. And when the time comes for that throne to be seated by the real king, that throne will kick everybody off. It says about Shlomo HaMelech that if you weren't meant to go on the throne, it says over there that the lion would kick it. It didn't work. You had to be fitting to sit on that throne. Mashiach is the only one who will sit on that throne. So Hashem is showing us. I'm not a guarantor to say that there won't be whatever. Let's hope we don't have to deal with any more fake governments. But one thing is for sure, we're being shown signs. The time has come for the right ruler. It's now. It's Matzah Shemitah, coming to Matzah Shemitah. Now the question is, do we sit back as bystanders and watch and hope that all this happens just miraculously from above, or are we active participants? So let me add something mind-blowing that I taught last night. You can listen to a two-hour class that I gave last night. It's mind-blowing not because from my class, it's mind-blowing because the talk is mind-blowing. It's a maimah from the Rebbe. The Lubavitcher Rebbe gives a talk explaining, it's called Yehi Hashem Elokeinu Imanu. The previous Rebbe, who was released from imprisonment today, again 95 years ago, so on Gimel Tammuz, which is it's like 9 days before, He was initially released from jail, and then he was sent to exile. So when he stood on the platform, speaking to the Jews who came to greet it, send them off, in that bittersweet moment when on the one hand they got to see their Rebbe, on the other hand they knew that the Rebbe is being sent off to exile, and who knows, going into the Russian outer back in the cold, freezing Siberian whatever. There's no guarantees. So it was a very, very harsh moment, a difficult time. The previous Rebbe, and again, if you look carefully, you see it's so clear. It's like I feel like once Mashiach comes, we're going to pinch ourselves. How come we had all the clues? Everything was there. Everything was so written out, and we were kind of blind. We just didn't see it. It's like so clear. The Friedrich Rebbe, when he's standing on the platform, he chooses to say a prayer. Whose prayer does he choose to use? He uses Shlomo Melech's prayer when Shlomo Melech is building the Beis Hamikdash. And he's stating, Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu. It's a pasuk that comes from Malachim when Shlomo Melech is building the Beis Hamikdash. Shlomo Melech, King Solomon says, God should be with us like he was with our fathers. Al yazveinu v'al yachenu. He should not forsake us. He shouldn't leave go of us. So the Rebbe, it's a long discussion. Again, you can learn the mimer. And the Friedrich Rebbe opens up his thing saying, Hashem, we're asking Hashem that Hashem should be with us, and he will be with us like he was with our fathers, even though we can't compare to our fathers because they were Bali Mesiras Nefesh B'Poyel. They laid their lives on the line, and perhaps he's suggesting we don't. The Rebbe asks the question, what do you mean you don't? You just sat in jail, you almost were killed, and you're living the last 10 years in the most dangerous situation. What do you mean? And you have to, even if you're humble, even humility has to make sense. You can't make a statement, you're also Bal Mesiras Nefesh. So the Rebbe gives the answer, which is astounding, which is, again, it's a deep mimer for everybody to learn. And again, if you want a little understanding of it, you can listen to last night's class. It's called, the mimer is from Tafshin Chav Daled, but it was given out, I think, on Tafshin Nun. In any case, but what's negaya to us, what I want to mention over here. The Rebbe asks another question, and this, I think, is like the clincher of everything we're saying today. What does it mean in the pasuk? Hashem should be, let God, our God, be with us. He asks the question, what does it mean with us? Whenever you say with, the person who's coming along is like a tag-along. It's like a secondary element. If I say, who's going to, to meet so-and-so. So you say, oh, I'm going. And then you say, yeah, but can someone come with me? So who's going along? So obviously we all understand the person who's going along is secondary. There is the main and someone going along. So what does it mean when he said, Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu, implying that we are more primary than Hashem, which doesn't make any sense. The question is not on the previous Rebbe, the question is on Shlomo Melech. What's this lashon? Yehi Hashem Elokeinu, God is primary. What do you mean Hashem should be with you? So the Rebbe answers something that gave me chills. And if you really, 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 really realize the depth of what is being said, this is exactly what we're talking about right now, what the Avodah is. The Rebbe says, he brings a teaching from Rabbeinu Bachaya. Rabbeinu Bachaya says, it speaks about fear of God, about fear of Hashem. It says, it's called, in Chazal, it's referred to, Oitzer Shel Yirah Shamayim. Fear of Hashem is called a treasure trove of fear of God, fear of heaven. So Rabbeinu Bachai says, why do we refer to fear of Hashem as a treasure trove? And he answers. He says the only thing a king keeps in a treasure, what does he keep in a treasure? What he collects. What does he collect it from? All the fortune of a king, he collects. Now you can say a king gets treasures from his fathers and from his fathers, but there was once upon a time that there was the first king, right? And where did the kings become so wealthy? How did the first king become so wealthy? It's because the king is the leader and he's above everyone else, and everybody else pays their taxes to the king. So the king's money, he doesn't get it. He doesn't manufacture the money on his own. The king only has in his treasures what he collected from everybody else. So the Rebbe says the Eibush there has everything. Heaven and earth belong to him. Kali kala aretz, everything belongs to him. There's only one thing that God doesn't have, and we have to give it. And the Rebbe says that's our fear of him, because we have to choose to fear him, and Hashem can't control that. We choose to fear Hashem. That's our choice. Especially there's certain fear that could be maybe, impressed upon you from the outside. The Rebbe says the main fear, which is considered the fear that can only come from us, he says, is a fear from a subject to a king. Because you only fear the king that you elected to be your king. And let me explain that. What does he mean by that? So a short example I used yesterday. If you are a subject of the king of Austria, and you went to visit the Austrian capital, and you went to the palace, and you're going on. So if you're an Austrian subject, you're trembling. We don't really appreciate it so much today because we don't live in a world of kings. So when you go to the king, and you go to the king of Austria, so you would be terrified, really scared, shaking, not because he'll punish you. It's just, it striking fears you. Now, what happens on that very day that the king of France came to visit the Austrian king? So there are two kings there. Now, the king of France might be wealthier, might be wiser, might have a greater army, and might have a greater lineage of ancestors going back. And maybe the Austrian king empire only started, let's say, 600 years ago, and the French kingdom is already 800, 900 years old. And maybe it's more influential on the world. But you don't dread meeting the French king because he's not your king. You did not accept that king upon you. Only when you accept the king upon you, then you fear him. And the Rebbe says, why? Why? The depth of it. The Rebbe says, because anything that's impressed upon you from the outside can only reach you on the more external level of your existence. The only thing that can reach you at your very nucleus of self is what you yourself elect to do. There's a certain space where only you can control. No outside influence can reach in so deep. And therefore, the Rebbe says, since being a subject and fearing a king like a subject means that you are completely, from your very essence, your entire being is given over to the king, that kind of giving over, you can only do it on your own. And therefore, the king can't control that. After you elect the king, then he's your king, and he can, and you're his subject. And obviously, we're talking about a good king and a benevolent and a kind king. And together, you can do awesome things. But it's only after the king is a king. And how can the king become a king? When you make the king a king. It's interesting. That's what the pasuk says. When Hashem tells us to appoint a king, it's amazing. Hashem doesn't say, listen to your king that I will appoint. We would think it should say in the pasuk. Hashem says, when you go into Eretz Yisrael, I'll give you a king. You better listen to your king. It doesn't say that. Hashem says, when you go into Eretz Yisrael, go into Israel, Soin tasim alecha melech. You put upon yourself a king, because the king can only be a king if you placed it up. You took the king upon yourself, and that's the ultimate, and that triggers everything. So what that really, really says to us is that Mashiach needs to be coronated. Mashiach needs to be accepted by us. He cannot appoint himself as king over us. He cannot do it. It's not kingship. Kingship must come from the people. It cannot come from anything other. It's a voluntary, exciting, joyful element. When you recognize the awesomeness of who this is, you give yourself over from your entire self. You say, my identity is I belong to you. You're my king and I'm your subject. And this is the only explanation I can explain that makes possibly sense. How come the Lubavitcher Rebbe spent 3 years of sichos, at least 2 years, the last 2 years, I mean, really, I would say from 1988, throwing so many clues of what his job is and who he is, so many clues. And yet, at the same time, like when people felt that they need to announce and tell everybody else, you should be doing so and so, the Rebbe would stop it. But at the same time, he's like so you start wondering, he's a smart man, he's a super intelligent being on all levels. I'm talking about, even if you take away the godliness, that the Shekhinah speaks through him and so on and so forth. Why in the world is he giving us all this information about what his job is? And like he's the one who's supposed to close everything and finish everything, and that non-stop. And he's talking about Mashiach, and he tells us the entire story of Mashiach, and he weaves it around himself and his father-in-law and the final generation and all these things. If you listen to my classes, you know what I'm talking about. In all of his classes, he does that. And yet he doesn't say it openly, and he doesn't tell us. He says we need to do whatever we can to greet Mashiach, but he doesn't. It's very, very clear to me. The Rebbe has to give us the information because he's the only one who has the vision. He's the only one who can tell us when the world is ready, when the thing is. But the final act has to come from us. It's almost like it's impossible for him to tell us to go do it. If he tells us to go do it, it defeats the whole purpose. It cannot be. It has to be an election coming from us. So when we stand right now in the world, going back to the time that we're in, as I mentioned earlier, Israel has no government, but it's not only that Israel doesn't have a government. The United States situation, the presidency is the laughing stock of the world. It's just so in ruins. It's so fallen. It's so broken. There's absolutely no respect anymore. There's nothing. It's a joke. In England, they lost their ruler. Boris Johnson is out. Sadly, in Japan, the guy was assassinated. He wasn't the ruler now, but still, he was the most popular politician, and so on and so forth. It's like if you look across the world, you're seeing a vacancy of leadership like we've never seen before. There's no leader. And where do we stand? We know the truth. The Rebbe told us the whole truth. He told us who he is and what he is. He gave us all the sichas. He told us how, but the final act must come from us. A joyful, happy, complete, exciting, and one that comes from our entire being of our cry, long live the king, and our giving ourselves over. So we started this thing a couple of months ago, and Baruch Hashem, there were like all across Chabad people that signed on this special ksav in which you sign what's called a contract of connection. Hasidim always did it with the Rebbe. The Rebbe only became Rebbe after the Hasidim all signed from all across the world. Not everybody, but many, many people basically said to the Rebbe back in 1950, that we are giving ourselves over to you. We're here as your people, and we're backing your leadership, and we from our depth of our being are yours. And that's and the Rebbe kept on pushing it away, but eventually we prevailed. And that's what brought about, changed the world forever. We are now at exactly the same threshold. And don't look outside and think it's not so popular. It's not going to be everybody. It's going to be some people who are going to have the schus. And hopefully, if we do it right and we reach out and we explain this to others, we'll bring more and more and more people, because this is the emes, and the emes will prevail. And the time is now. So it's an awesome time, this Yud Beis Tammuz, for everybody to take the Ksavas Kashrus, to read it, to understand what you're saying, and joyfully say, I'm your subject. I'm here. It's Hashem's kingdom. And for move the world to the next stage, which is the Geula, this is a requirement. May Hashem help us all that we should have the schus to be part of it, and to bring about the complete revelation of Mashiach Tzidkenu. And it should be, that's why the Rebbe explains, I'm just going to conclude, Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imanu, that when it comes to certain avodas, Hashem can only assist you from the side, but he can't do it. So of course you're asking Hashem, those in Yonam, like the Friedrich Rebbe having Mesiras Nefesh, the Rebbe says, is also something that you choose to do. Hashem can't do it for you. It must come from you. And therefore, in those in Yanim, Hashem can only be a cheerleader from the side and like give you the encouragement. It's almost like, you're afraid to go into a cold pool. You know that? You want to go swimming, it's cold. You're like, and then somebody can like really cheer you on, but the only one who can get you in is if you yourself don't push you in. But that doesn't, is you got to make that move to dive in. And that's exactly where we stand today. We need to make that move. We need to give ourselves over. We need to understand that this is who we are and what we are at our deepest point. This is what we were created for. Our generation is the schus to be able to bring about redemption for all of the world and for all the generations. And therefore, let's just do it happily and joyfully, sincerely, from a very deep place and a very real place. And we will see the Geula now.